मेधा देवी जुषमाणा न आगाद्विश्वाची भद्रा सुमनस्यमाना त्वया जुष्टानुदमाना दुरुक्तान् बृहद्वदेम विदधे सुवीराः त्वया जुष्ट ऋषिर्भवति देवि त्वया ब्रह्मा गतश्रीरुतत्वया त्वया जुष्टश्चित्रं विन्दते वसुसानो जुषस्वद्रविणो न मेधे मेधां म इन्द्रो ददातु मेधां देवी सरस्वती मेधां मे अश्विनावुभावा धत्तां पुष्करस्रजाम् अप्सरासु च या मेधा गन्धर्वेषु च यन्मनः दैवी मेधा सरस्वती सामा मेधासुरभिर्षताम् आमा मेधासुरभिर्विश्वरूपा हिरण्यवर्णा जगती जगम्या ऊर्जस्वती पयसा पिन्वमाना सामा मेधा सुप्रतीका जुषन्तां मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मयि अग्निस्तेजो दधातु मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मयीन्द्र इन्द्रियं दधातु मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मयि सूर्यो भ्राजो दधातु ओम शांति शांति शांतिः।
Namaskar, Swagatam, and welcome to Indica Center for Soft Powers webinar series, Soft Talk 9, celebrating Saraswati festivities in India and Southeast Asia. We just listened to a very nice rendering of the Medha Suktam by Aishwarya Chaitanya. Thank you so much, Aishwarya. We also have with us Peter Welterwert, the artist who so graciously allowed us to use his art of Goddess Saraswati for our flyer. Thank you so much, Mr. Peter Welterwert, and thank you so much for being with us today. The Center for Soft Power is dedicated to the study of Indian soft power, focusing on her cultural heritage globally. The center maps the various elements of India's culture, including yoga, performing arts, Ayurveda, cinema, cuisine, craft, design, visual arts, language, literature, spirituality, experiential tourism, sports, Indic knowledge systems, education, and more, by engaging with practitioners, promoters, and academicians. Saturday, the 5th of February, on Magha Shukla Paksha Panchami, according to the Indian calendar, we celebrated Basanta Panchami, a day to honor Goddess Saraswati, the bestower and embodiment of all knowledge and wisdom. A day to start new learning, turn the color yellow and adorn her with yellow flowers and offer her sweets made of milk and sesame seeds. The worship of Saraswati has traveled all over Southeast Asia, even as far away as Japan. We have with us two scholars who have so willingly agreed to speak today, Dr. Chitra Madhavan and Sri Binoy Bail. We will begin with a video address by Sri Srin Kumar, who is the present Director General of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations. Sri Kumar Tuhin is a career diplomat from the 1991 batch of the Indian Foreign Service. He was Ambassador of India to Hungary in 2018. Earlier, he served as India's High Commissioner to Namibia. He has worked in various positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A graduate of IIT Kanpur, he worked for a few years in the Indian Railway Service of Mechanical Engineers before he joined the Indian Foreign Service. So we can watch the video of, it's a video address of Sri Srin Kumar. He couldn't be here with us today, so he has sent us a video address. And after which, we will begin this evening's proceedings.
I am glad to learn that Center for Soft Power, which is a platform under the Indica Academy, is organizing a webinar on the occasion of Basanta Panchami. The webinar is on the topic of celebrating Saraswati festivities in India and Southeast Asia. India's cultural connection with and civilizational influence on Southeast Asia is huge. We have been linked together for centuries, and this can be seen easily in the arts, architecture, culture, monuments, literary works, and other diverse areas. While assimilating various strands of Indian culture, these countries also added their own local elements and making the outcome very typical Southeast Asian. I have myself served in some countries in this region and have been privileged to witness for myself the common civilizational heritage. In recognition of this common connection and bond, the government of India has put in place its Act East policy to further improve and strengthen our ties with this region. I would like to convey my best wishes to the organizers for organizing this seminar and also my best wishes for success. And my greetings to everyone on the occasion of Vasant Panchami.
Thank you to Sri Kumar for sending us his message. We hope to have him live at our next event. Coming to the main speakers of the day, we first have Dr. Chitra Madhavan, a very close friend of the Center for Soft Power. Dr. Chitra is a historian and expert at temple architecture. She has also authored many books and has edited Kalakshetra Sculpture, which contains about 20 articles on iconography by well-known authors on the subject. She has also compiled books on the Srirangam Temple and the Varadaraja Perumal Temple in Kanchipuram. We're very glad to have you here, Dr. Chitra. With that warm welcome, it's over to you.
Oh, namaste. Thank you very much to all the organizers of the Center for Soft Power, especially Mrs. Vijayalakshmi, for inviting me here this evening to this very interesting talk by Sri Binoy Bail. My contribution to this evening's program will not be about Goddess Saraswati. It will be a general introduction to how Hinduism has spread to Southeast Asia. And I wish to introduce this through the case study of just one temple, which is the Bante Sri Temple in Cambodia, by way of its architecture and sculpture. In a duration of, say, 10 to 12 minutes, it is impossible for me to do full justice to the spread of Hinduism in entire Southeast Asia, or even in a country like Cambodia in particular, which is why I have chosen this particular temple, a very small temple, but chock full of very beautiful sculptures. Just give me a second, please, while I screen share. Just a second, please. All right. So this Bante Sri Temple, one of the oldest in Cambodia. We all know of the famous Angkor Wat. I won't even be touching on that subject today because before I even introduce it, it will be more than 15 minutes. So the Bante Sri Temple, as it is known today, citadel of women, is because of the many deities, the Apsaras carved on the sandstone walls. But the original name was a very Sanskritam name, Ravana Maheshwara, the great god of the three worlds. It was a Shiva temple. This is the ground plan. It had libraries, it had many shrines, entrance ways, consecrated in the reign of Rajendra Varman. Absolutely no connection to Rajendra Chola of the Chola Empire, who lived more than a century later. So this Rajendra Varman was in the 10th century. it was constructed in the reign of Rajendra Varman. But the person who was responsible for the actual construction of the temple was a person named Yajnavaraha and his younger brother Vishnu Kumara. So this Tribhuvana Maheshwara temple, even the date is very clearly given in inscriptions there, 22nd April 967. And this was when the Chola Empire was going from height to greater height in Tamil Nadu, in South India. So there is a beautiful verse in Sanskritam. I won't go into it. You can all read it. It is there on the walls of this temple. It's etched in a script called Grantha, in which this language named Sanskritam was used. This script was used for the language Sanskritam, and we can see it by way of inscriptions starting from the 7th century. Pallava period, and the Pandyas were there, continued in the Chola times, this script, and it continued in later times as well. So this Yajnavaraha, who was a Brahmana, was incidentally a grandson of Harshavarman, and he was a Purohita, the chief priest of Rajendra Varman. This temple, like many other temples that we know in India, did not stay the way it was, and it was expanded in the 11th century AD. And subsequently, another king called Surya Varman II, a famous king, also contributed to it. I won't go into great details. There are many inscriptions to many deities, 11 inscriptions in the Banteshri temple. They are in Sanskritam and the Khmer language. So this is how this temple looks. It's a combination of not only the Nagara or the North Indian style of architecture, it has some elements of architecture from other parts of India as well. Let me go straight to some of the excellent sculptures that you find. Most of them are in this portion called the pediment above the doorways. So we have images of Shiva, of some incarnations of Vishnu. We have Devi as well. So look at this one. The Vali Sugriva fight we find carved on many of the temples of South India, many in other parts of India as well. But this is really unique. You have Vali and Sugriva fighting here, and Rama actually seen shooting the arrow with Lakshmana behind him, and Vali falls with the arrow inside his, piercing his chest. Now we go to one more sculpture. This is it. Varuna in India is one of the Dikpalas, the Ashta Dikpalas, or guardians of the 8 different directions. And it is, according to the Agama Shastras, Varuna should be shown seated on a makara, or an aquatic animal. But there is a slight change when it comes to the depiction of Varuna in Cambodia, and he is seen seated on a swan like this. 3, like this. This is how Varuna is shown over here. We go still further into this temple, and we see the Narasimha incarnation of Vishnu. Generally in India, and there are ever so many temples depicting Narasimha, he is shown seated with the demon Hiranyakashipu lying down horizontally on his lap, and Narasimha tearing out the intestines and sometimes wearing it as a garland. Here, this is Narasimha like this, and Hiranyakashipu is shown like this, hanging down. This is a distinctly different representation, but totally according to how it has been described in the Puranas. Gajalakshmi, exactly how she is seen in South India. Various images from the Vaishnavite, the Shaivite, and the Shakta tradition are here. Shiva and Parvati seated on their Rishabha like this. But look at the garment that Parvati is wearing. It's suitable to the Cambodian ethos over here, unfortunately damaged. This sculpture that I'm showing you is found on a pediment that is unfortunately not in its original location. You find a person carrying a lady and 2 people on either side holding weapons. Now we would immediately associate this large figure with Ravana and this lady with Sita. But if that was true, then who are these 2 people on either side? So this cannot be Ravana, because we do not hear of him in any Ramayana being attacked by two men. It was only Jatayu who attacked him. So this cannot be Ravana. The only other person who tried to carry Sita away was Viradha. It comes in the Valmiki Ramayana. And so this is Rama and Lakshmana, excuse me, attacking this demon. We have many inscriptions, as I told you, in the Grantha script and in Sanskritam language, chaste Sanskritam that you have over here. So on another pediment, you have, let me zoom, this is Nataraja. This is Shiva dancing, as you can see over here. So we could look at it and go away, or turn our attention to a lady who is here. And that lady, I'm zooming on this figure over here, is a person with only people from Tamil Nadu will be familiar with this name. She's Karaikal Ammayar, one of the 63 Nayanmars, or one of the 63 great devotees of God Shiva, known in the Tamil tradition. Now, Karaikal Ammayar is associated very closely with this is how Shiva dances, and this is Karaikal Ammayar here, with the talam or the cymbals in her hand, keeping time to Shiva's dance. So we quickly go to this place called Thiruvalangadu, which is about 2 hours drive approximately from Chennai, near a place called Arakonam. And over here is a huge temple. I'm going a little fast, as I say, I'm running out of time. We go to a temple which is called the Bataar and Yeshwara temple, very ancient Shiva shrine. And here, among many new sculptures that you find, there is one of Shiva doing the Urdhva Tandava with his leg lifted, his left leg lifted over here. And there is Karaikal Ammayar. She is totally associated with the ethos of the Thiruvalangadu tradition. Everywhere you turn in this temple, the association of Karaikal Ammayar, the lady who is such a great devotee of Shiva, is there. Like even this modern sculpture, there is Karaikal Ammayar. You go to another temple in Tamil Nadu. This is the famous Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple, the Shiva temple in Gangaikonda Cholapuram. You have a representation of Nataraja here, and at the base you have Karaikal Ammayar. So the point, there is a bronze image of Karaikal Ammayar also from the Chola period. And there is a temple for Karaikal Ammayar in a place called Karaikal, from where she hailed. So all this tradition that is there in Tamil Nadu was transported to Cambodia in the ancient times. And there, on a pediment in the Banteshri temple, you can see Karaikal Ammayar. I mean, this is how our tradition has spread in such great detail to countries of Southeast Asia. Here you find Ravana shaking Mount Kailash. The representation of Ravana in Cambodia is like this: heads piled one on top of the other instead of going sideways. So this concept of Ravana shaking Mount Kailash that we find in the Puranas is very much there in the temples of India. They are carved. And you can see Shiva and Parvati right atop Mount Kailash, which Ravana is trying to shake. And this is Parvati out of fright. She is hugging God Shiva. This is there in the Banteshri temple on one of the pediments up there. Now, we quickly go to Karnataka. We go to a place called Pattadakkal. And there in the Virupaksha temple, you find on a narrow face of one of the pillars, Ravana shaking Mount Kailash like this. Anyway, so many other temples. Ellora, the monolithic temple of Kailash in Ellora in Maharashtra, as one of the most outstanding representations of Ravana lifting Mount Kailash. So back to the Banteshri temple, and very quickly, we see so many others, Shiva on the Rishabha, etc. And just give me a second. There are a few more wonderful sculptures. I'm just getting to them. Again, Shiva and Parvati over here. This is unfortunately very damaged. but goddess Durga with her Simha Vahana, a lion mount, and killing Mahishasura. You can see the hind legs of Mahishasura over here, and she's putting her spear through him. A lovely representation, a very vibrant representation of goddess Durga. We come to one more very, very interesting sculpture, which we don't find in India, or we hardly find in India, and that is this. This is supposed to be Krishna killing Kamsa over here. Very rare. It is there in at least one Vijayanagara temple in South India, but not commonly found. Yet another sculpture is that of the Kandavana episode in the Mahabharata. And give me 1 second, let me zoom. So this is Krishna on one side, Arjuna on the other, on their respective chariots, and they are burning this forest. And these are the snakes trying to come out of the forest because of the intense heat. Let's just zoom in on this. These are the arrows that are sent up by Arjuna to prevent Indra, who is on his Mount Airavata. Here it's shown with multi-headed, and Indra wants to send down a shower to help his friend Agni, fire, to put out the fire. But Arjuna has created a canopy of arrows so that the water sent by Indra doesn't drench the fire and extinguish it. Now, to the best of my knowledge, we don't see this sculpture in India, and it is one of the rare ones that you see. This is the full one in the Banteshri temple on a pediment. So these are this is the original Nandi, the Vrishabha, the mount of Shiva that was there in this temple once. And these are all various parts of this temple having wonderful sculptures. So this is a very short lecture from Narasimha once again. And I'll conclude with this, but not before saying that in every part of Southeast Asia, we have had our tradition from India going there. It was there with the people, and it was represented in art, it was represented in architecture, the rituals and the festivals. All of India's tradition went outside through traders, not through invaders, mainly through trade contacts, mainly through cultural contacts, pervaded that entire area, and it stayed on for quite some time. We still have it through art, architecture, tradition, etc. And Mr. Benoy Bale will take us through many of the intricate facts that are there, most of which we have not heard of before, and it will definitely be a very enriching experience for us. Much information conveyed in a very interesting way. Looking forward to your talk, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chitra, for that wonderful and brilliantly researched pictorial delight. We will come back to you after our next presentation to hear more from you. Our next speaker for the day is Shri Binoy K. Bale. Binoyji is a filmmaker who has made over 145 deeply researched documentary films. He is an eminent photographer, author, a Buddhist scholar, and a record-setting traveler. His photographic exhibitions have been warmly received in 74 countries around the world. Binoyji is the first person to photograph the Buddhist paintings of Ajanta in their true colors and details. Of his many significant contributions has been to unearth the extremely close ties of culture between the people of Japan and India. He has deeply researched this wonderful connection between India and Japan for more than a score of years. Recently, the Japan Foundation gave him a fellowship which helped him to study this further. The Japan Foundation also created an exhibition of his photographs and text, and this was held in the premises of the Japan Foundation in Delhi. It was also hosted later by the Rashtrapati Bhavan Museum, India Museum of Kolkata, Salarjung Museum in Hyderabad, and many more in India. The Ministry of External Affairs has also asked him to make a film, Indian deities worshipped in Japan, which shows the influence of Indian deities and worship in Japan. Thank you for being here with us, Binoyji. With that brief introduction, we hand over the session to you.
Thank you very much, Varsha. And my thanks to Srimati Vijay Vijay Kumar for this invitation to give this talk today. And Ambassador Tuhin Kumar, it's a pleasure to once again be speaking at a function which you have addressed. Dr. Chitra Madhavan, thank you for a most interesting introduction to the spread of Indian influence in Southeast Asia. It was a pleasure to hear you talk, and I look forward to talking further with you after my talk and subsequent film screening. Ladies and gentlemen, how many are aware that almost all the deities that we worship in India are worshipped by the people of Japan till today? As a matter of fact, how many know that the deity Saraswati, after the Buddha, is the most revered deity in Japan? How many know that the tallest temple standing today, dedicated to a Hindu deity, is the Saraswati temple at Osaka in Japan? How many would know that the most important and largest lake in Japan, Lake Biwa, is named after the Veena of Saraswati, called Biwa in Japanese? Now, most interestingly, the Japanese have preserved ancient Indian philosophy very well. As a matter of fact, it is when we go to Japan that we get to see the original context in which the deity Saraswati was conceived. You would recall that Saraswati, along with Ganga and Yamuna, are the first three deities who are the personifications of rivers. And though we continue to worship Saraswati in India today as the personification of our wisdom, of our lyricism, of our art, of our music, and so much of the fruits of our mind, we sometimes forget that Saraswati was originally the personification of the great river, which watered the Maya of the world. But in Japan, Saraswati till today is worshipped not only with the Veena, but is also worshipped in pools of water. So marvelously, the Japanese retain the original knowledge along with the later knowledge. It's absolutely fascinating. In fact, many deities that we have forgotten practically today in India, such as Vayu and Varuna, continue to be worshipped actively every day in Japan. Now, the Homa called Goma in Japan continues to be practiced every day in more than 1,200 temples of Japan, at least once a day and more than once a day. In many cases, the Havan is celebrated. It's marvelous to see it being done. And best of all, it is done along with chanting in Sanskrit. And this is the most beautiful part of it. This chanting in Sanskrit is made possible done by so many priests who cannot read Sanskrit, by the fact that in fact the Japanese alphabet kana was created upon the phonetics of Sanskrit to make this possible. This is how close is the connection between India and Japan. And of course, not just India and Japan, but all the countries of Asia. I've had the good fortune to travel extensively and to document in practically all the countries of Asia. And it is amazing to see the depth of cultural association that there is. Perhaps there will be other opportunities when I can share with you more details about more countries. But this time we are talking about Japan. Now, you would be happy to know that the 5th, 6th century script of Sanskrit, called Siddham, is in fact preserved in Japan, while it has been forgotten in India. The alphabet of that script is worshipped in Japan. In practically every single home in Japan, in the shrine room of the house, people worship the Sanskrit alphabet, the Siddham Sanskrit alphabet. And the only place in the world where you can learn Sanskrit today in the Siddham alphabet is in Koyasan in Japan. So it's marvelous to see these things. And in fact, I would highly recommend to the Honorable Director General of ICCR that we should do something with regard to Koyasan and the Sanskrit alphabet, which is still in use, very actively in use, and taught at Koyasan. And there is so much more to be done. And best of all this is worth the doing, because all this is based upon a great ethical foundation. Chitra was speaking about the spread of Hindu and Indian culture. And all this was, as she quite correctly pointed out, not through the use of the sword, but because people wanted it. And people have wanted it because of its ethical context. This is a marvelous philosophy which helps people to understand life, to understand how to live in the world with joy and happiness and with ethical standards. So, in fact, the further understanding of all this and the further understanding of our connections with Japan and with so many other countries, which highlights its beautiful philosophical heritage, would in fact be better for the world, I believe, because we are talking about a heritage of peace. We are talking about a heritage of compassion, kindness. We're talking about a very great philosophic heritage, which once flowed out of these shores and which was so warmly accepted everywhere. And of course, you're going to see many more details in the film. And you would be happy to know that this film is a very unique one. In fact, as the director of the Japan Foundation informed the India International Center audience the last time that my exhibition on this subject was shown and the film was shown. In this film, you get to see, as he said, so many deities, so many shrines, so many temples, the interiors of temples in Japan, which the Japanese also cannot see. And this was a very, very unique documentation which took place. As a matter of fact, I remember that when I was making this film, colleagues of mine, professors in the USA, for instance, who studied Japan, who wrote about Japan, they all tried to forewarn me and inform me that you'd better be prepared, that you will not be allowed to shoot inside the temples in Japan. You will not be able to shoot interviews with the chief priests because they simply don't allow these things. And I wrote to 50 of the most important Buddhist temples in Japan, hoping that at least 3 or 4 would say yes. And even that would have been enough to make a meaningful film. And as you would have it, all 50 said yes. Of course, I had the advantage that all these temples have held my exhibitions, my photographic exhibitions of the Buddhist heritage of India. But more than that, it was the kindness of the chief priests of these temples to appreciate that I was doing my work sincerely. As many of you would be aware, the Japanese are very concerned about knowledge. The misrepresentation of knowledge is something which they fear. And indeed, I believe that is a demon that should be feared, the misrepresentation. And the Japanese chief priests were so kind and so warm in understanding that here was a sincere work which was going to happen. And ladies and gentlemen, that provided this unique film which you are about to see. I would have to not only thank the Japan Foundation that encouraged my research to be completed in this field, but also the Ministry of External Affairs who asked me to make a film on the subject of my research. And even more than that, I would have to thank the people of Japan who came forward to help in every moment. They were yogis, they were people who study and practice yoga who came forward. And the selflessness with which a Japanese helps, the selflessness with which a Japanese does karma yoga is something which is remarkable to be seen. It is completely selfless and it is completely warm and with concentration, with the bringing of all intelligence, with the bringing of focus upon how to do karma yoga, how to help. And this is some of the bases. In fact, one day perhaps I will speak to you more about yoga, which is the essence of, which is the action part of all Indian philosophy, and how it pervades the entire, all the philosophic systems which come away from India. But for the time being, I will just say this, that Saraswati, along with Gajalakshmi, are the two oldest formalized deities within iconography that are seen in Indian art. The earliest Saraswati is seen on the Buddhist stupa railings which were at Bharut and are today preserved in the Indian Museum, Kolkata, of the 2nd century BCE. And the other Saraswati that is seen of that period is from the stupa railings of the Jaina stupa, which was at Kankali Tila near Mathura. And ladies and gentlemen, I will have to thank Sujata Chatterjee, who is the one who helps me in all that I do. And may I request that the film may please be shown now, and we will come back after the film. Along with the ideas of Buddhism and Hinduism, the culture of Indian deities traveled across the whole of Asia.
Very interestingly, more than 80% of Japanese god are originally Indian god.
This close relationship between the people of India and Japan has not been known to most people. Well-researched books on the subject are also not available.
Most of Japanese don't know. For example, I live in Kichijoji, in the outskirts of Tokyo. This Kichijoji literally means Temple of Kisho goddess. And the Kisho is originally Lakshmi. So thus, I came from Lakshmi town. This should be recognized by Japanese people, the bottom of Japanese culture. Indian culture is very strongly imprinted and developed in the Japanese way.
The Tudaiji Temple at Nara is one of the oldest and most revered temples of Japan. The 48 feet high Vairochana here is the largest bronze statue in the world.
Already in the 8th century, Indian Buddhist monk named Bodhisena has arrived to Japan, and he inaugurated the eye-opening the ceremony of great Buddha of Tudaiji Temple in 752.
Bodhisena and Buddhasthira, they then went to a temple nearby Dayanji, where they started the teaching of Sanskrit in Japan for the first time.
When the Japanese studied Sanskrit in the 8th and 9th centuries, Sanskrit was synonymous with the Siddham script. This was used for writing Sanskrit since the 5th century in India.
Thus, Japan and India was very closely connected. If you go to Japanese tomb, you may find sit-down letters. No Japanese can read these letters written on the tomb timber. And again in Japan, there is a Koya-san temples. In these Koya-san temples, they have still sit-down Sanskrit the school. Many monks are learning this Sanskrit, but the Sanskrit is sit-down letters. So perhaps Japan is a time capsule of Indian culture. Already in India disappeared.
There is a deep relationship between Kana, the Japanese alphabet, and Sanskrit. The Japanese wrote Sanskrit through simplified Chinese characters, which developed into the Japanese alphabet, Kana.
And this Japanese, the alphabet pronounced A, I, U, E, O, like Sanskrit, exactly as the Sanskrit.
In Japan, they also use the Indian letters for writing of sacred syllables or bijaksharas, which have the power of mantras. Every Buddhist monastery in Japan has a seal in which there is a bijakshara, a sacred syllable, as a short name of the monastery. There are some words in Japanese which are derived from Sanskrit, like O Seva, from Seva, service. And there are about 100 Sanskrit words which are used in Japanese.
Most of the Japanese, they are using that, but without knowing that that is the originally from Sanskrit. Suppose like they call the Buddhist temples at Thera. Thera means it is from the Pali term Thera, means a Buddhist monk, a bhikshu having 10 years experience.
In the words of His Excellency Mr. Yasukuni Enoki, as I come from the Japanese Lakshmi town, it is no great surprise to me to find that Japanese life is full of so many Hindu deities. Japanese people are unaware of their origins. One of the most revered deities of Japan is Saraswati. There are scores of shrines built to her. In many ways, the original concept of Saraswati and her association with the natural order and good fortune are very well preserved in Japan. She is often visualized as a sacred body of water. In Japan, we find the continuance of so many early ideas of Indian philosophy. The annals of the Tudaiji Temple mention that the celebration of the worship of Lakshmi and Saraswati was held for the first time in this temple in 722 AD. Ever since, it has been an annual celebration. In 1836, Saito Sachio wrote a guidebook to the Edo area or modern Tokyo. Saraswati was mentioned as the most popular deity here at that time. In 1934, Lady Chibin Sonyo felt that she had become an incarnation of Saraswati. She started writing in Sanskrit, though she had never studied the language. She founded the Benten Shu Saraswati sect. This sect holds water as divine, as it is the abode of Saraswati. We are reminded that Saraswati is the personification of the great river which once flowed in India. Benten Shu also worships her to bestow eloquence and learning. Worship of Lakshmi was done to ensure the peace of the land, wind and rain in good season, good harvests, joy of the people, and the good of all sentient beings. The great intellectual genius of Japan was Kukai or Kobo Daishi of the 9th century. He learnt the Sanskrit script from the Kashmiri Acharya Pragnya. Kobo Daishi placed emphasis on a knowledge of Sanskrit. He said that the Japanese have had to rely upon translations to study Buddhism. However, the true words in the original language are exceedingly important. Every word has a profound meaning.
The Japanese people use Sanskrit when they pray. Suppose in Sanskrit they say, Om Saraswati Swaha. In Japanese it becomes Om Saraswati Ke Swaka. In Japan, they are preserving the old Indian tradition Because they are following the ancient scriptures, they are also doing the puja and the mudras as well as the sadhana.
ムドラーですね。ムドラーもしてね。そして
There is nothing called Japanese or Japanese elements in these. It is the Indian Buddhist Tantric tradition.
ストートラもあります。それを持って礼拝して。
The Vajrayana Buddhist traditions of Japan trace their knowledge back to India, to Nagarjuna and other great acharyas of the Nalanda University.
Nagarjuna is known as Gujio in Japan. Without his teaching, the Buddhism of the Great Vehicle would not have existed.
The Lotus Sutra is a major spiritual creation with a profound impact on life in Japan. It was translated from the Sanskrit by Kumara Jiva 1600 years ago.
This is a temple that follows the Lotus Sutra. The sutra is originally from India and goes back to the teachings of the Buddha himself. It started from India and came to Japan.
A temple is dedicated to the deity Indra in the Shibamata area of Tokyo. It is a most important Indra shrine today.
This temple has 200,000 visitors on the New Year alone. There would be about 2 million visitors every year.
Varuna has been worshipped in many temples in Japan to prevent droughts, typhoons and floods which occur often in Japan. A shrine was dedicated to Varuna in the Fudodo Sanctuary in Tokyo in 1836. The temple also has a representation of Kamadeva. He is worshipped by many young couples. There are many temples dedicated to Yama in Japan.
The sound of the word Yama became Emma as the name traveled and came to Japan.
It is the most ancient temple to Lord Ganesha which has been in use for the last 1,000 years. And young boys and girls go there to be successful in their courtship. The merchants go there to gain success in their business. The oldest which has been continuously in worship for the last 1,000 years. And I don't think anywhere in the world we have a temple to Lord Ganesha who has been there in constant worship for the last millennium.
In the 7th century, Prince Shotoku created the nation-state of Japan after vanquishing his rivals. He took the term Tenno for emperor from Sanskrit texts.
And at the same time, he also wrote down a constitution for his country in 17 articles. Article 3 of the constitution clearly points out that the constitution is being based on the three ratna, the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. This is the first Asian constitution ever written. Important point is that its consecration was done with a Sanskrit text which is called the Ushnisha Vijaya Dharani.
The Sanskrit manuscript used for the consecration of the constitution would have been obtained from the Hindu kingdom of Champa in Vietnam. Havan or Homa continues in Japan, where it is called Goma. Goma in the Shingon and Tendai Buddhist sects of Japan has striking parallels with early Hindu rites of Agni worship. There are also deep similarities with the later Tantric tradition. The Havan is perhaps conducted in Japan at least as often as in India. The Tantric Shingon school of Japan sings Sanskrit hymns. To this day, followers of the sect perform their worship in 1,200 temples throughout Japan.
Esoteric Buddhism is from India, and the big philosophy of the universe is, of course, from India.
Vajrayana Buddhist worship in Japan is similar to Tibetan Buddhist worship. However, the Japanese tradition has preserved some early Vajrayana rites. A study of Japanese Buddhism helps to fill some gaps in our understanding of the development of Buddhism.
There are 4 types of Shingon mantras or Fudo-myu in Japan. These are the mantras used in Japan which are not in the Japanese language. They are taken from the Sanskrit language of India. In Sanskrit, Fudo is called Achalanatha. He seems to have his origin in the Hindu deity Shiva. The Myu is called Vidya Raja in Sanskrit. Here, it can be safely stated that Fudo-myu has his origin in the Hindu deities of India.
A sutra compares the cosmic force of the mantra with the mighty roar of a rising flood. The mantras were transcribed into ideograms, and to conserve their full power, they were also written in Siddham. Indian letters to a Japanese are sacred and stand for divine beings. To this day, the Japanese write mantras in Siddham.
This booklet contains prayers in Sanskrit that are commonly used in Shingonshu or esoteric Buddhism. It is written in Japanese, but the mantras are in Sanskrit. It is used in many ceremonies in Buddhism. Priests learn the intonation and how to pronounce it by using this booklet, which has Sanskrit and also has Japanese letters to convey the sounds of the Sanskrit words.
今言われましたようにね、ここは
Every god has his own Bija Akshara. People also worship that Bija Akshara. Every temple gives much importance to those Bija Aksharas because they are equal to God.
いろんな仏様、神様。
スタンプを押すその
Visitors bring an album. We call it Shinchin. The visitors go to various temples and collect these Siddham stamps in the albums. These albums are like holy books for the people.
ペーパーになってるのがありまして、
私たちは禅寺ですのでね。
We belong to a Zen Buddhist monastery, and we strive hard to sever the bond of birth, senility, disease, and death. The bond which is the cause of all suffering. As the Buddha said, desire is the root cause of pain in the world and should be overcome. This forms the basis of our ascetic practices, which come down to us from the Shakyamuni himself.
Bodhidharma, he transmitted Zen. Zen later has been transmitted to Japan also, and it is one of the most important sects in Japan.
Mist surround the legend of Bodhidharma. Tradition points out that he was a prince of Kanchipuram in South India. The Japanese form of his name is Bodhai Daruma. It is very close to the Tamil form, which is Bodhi Daruma. Zen was introduced in the 6th century. It was a wordless tradition, directly pointing to the human mind and the perception of one's true nature. Zen was taken to Japan in the 12th century by Isai. Its influence on Japanese art, attitudes, and language has been profound.
Zen Buddhism became very popular because it says that life is a fleeting phenomenon. And the samurai, when they went to war, they were never sure that they will come back. In this feeling, they go to war and there is no fear of death. So fearlessness in war was a very important contribution of the Zen tradition. And if you sit down, and when we sit down in a Zen monastery, you have to really do a very hard penance. And hard work in Japan is perfection. So it is the Zen tradition gave them a perfection in work. Force became a very important part of the modern development, perfection in everything.
初めてインドに参りましたとき、
When I visited India for the first time, I made sure to visit places like Nalanda University, Bodh Gaya, and also the garden path trodden by the Shakyamuni himself. I felt happy to see the university where Tripitaka masters used to come and study during the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. Whatever Buddhism we practice now has its roots in India, and without Indians, there would be no Buddhism in Japan.
この仏教はなかったわけでありますから。
インドでも日本でも
So many deities are common in India and Japan, and people are worshipping them in both the countries.
共通しているということは、まさしく
The hearts of the Indian people and the Japanese people have the same base.
つながっている一つの証ではないかと思います。
Japan is the one country where Buddhism is flourishing in all its facets. Here, technology and transcendence are living together. The deep-rooted spirit of Buddha's teachings energize the Japanese people. Buddhist temples are numerous and vast numbers of people visit them every day. Besides the Buddha, so many ancient Indian deities and practices are preserved in these temples. An Indian feels quite at home in Japan.
Thank you. That was a very interesting film that we've all seen. We come to the next part where we would like to have a few questions from Dr. Chitra Madhavan to Sri Binoyji on this film and on the worship of Hindu deities. Dr. Chitra?
That was a wonderful film that we saw just now. So enlightening, very, very informative. Thank you very much. My question to you is, how did you get interested in these traditions of Japan? How did you come to know about it? And this is intense research that you have done. How long did it take you?
Yes, thank you very much for your kind words. As you know, I have been an art historian now for 46 years. And I have been deeply interested in traveling to, in fact, I think I'm probably well known for having traveled to all corners of India, traveling even on horseback where roads did not exist, and for having traveled to all the countries of Asia, including very remote places, to study culture. The first visit to Japan was about 30 years ago, approximately 30 years ago. And right since then, I became aware of the fact that many Indian influences and many Indian deities are worshipped in Japan. Therefore, in my subsequent visits, because I have been to Japan many times, I've given
for the holding of my, I've gone for the holding of my exhibitions. I've given many lectures at the universities of Japan, at Buddhist temples in Japan, etc. So there have been many visits. And with each visit, I would learn a little more about the subject. And eventually there was a fair amount of knowledge which I had gathered. And at that point, the Japan Foundation very kindly gave me a fellowship to be able to take it to its fruition. And that has been the journey with Japan. And it has really been a journey driven by the fact that I have seen a great courtesy and a great wisdom of understanding of the Japanese people, which they feel they share with India, with ancient India. And that has been, in all my work, my entire focus is on understanding and putting forward the knowledge of kindness and compassion, which I believe, goodness, which I believe is at the essence of all knowledge and all the purpose of human activity. So Japan has been one of the countries which I have pursued. But at this point, I must say that it is, today we are talking about Japan, but there's so many other countries where I've had the joy of exploring culture. Thank you.
Right. This you have written this wonderful book in 2 volumes, The Art of India, which I have right here. Contains so much information and absolutely brilliant photographs. It's a great contribution to the art history of India. So how many years of research went into the writing of those 2 volumes?
Well, Chitra, as I said, my journey of art history began 46 years ago. And this book is only about 5 years old. So it's been more than 40 years of research which went into it. And here I would point out that first-hand research has been found enormously important by myself. It is the reading of books has not quite always provided the understanding which has come from actually going to places. And the width of the coverage has been enormously important in analysis and understanding. For instance, when you see the profound sculpture in the National Museum of Bangladesh, which is inscribed Maya, and it is the yoni and the Shivalinga, and out of that rises Maya. Now, all things that you see in different places help you get a breadth of vision. And if you travel to the Borobudur Stupa and you see the philosophy of the stupa, the meaning of the stupa, which you have known before, but you see it spelled out by the way that the Borobudur Stupa is made to define and explain what the stupa is. Or really, I mean, if you see the similarity of Jaina sculptural reliefs of the 8th, 9th century in the farthest south corner of Tamil Nadu near Kanyakumari, similarity of these with 10th, 11th century iconography of the Buddhists made by Kashmiri artists in Ladakh. You know, there is a depth of knowledge which comes from actual first-hand experience of going to places. So that, I would say, has been my greatest fortune, and I feel blessed that I never sat down. I used to travel even 250 days of each year. So I did a lot of traveling that helped to see a lot of things. Thank you very much, Chitra.
Very fortunate in having traveled the length and breadth of India and various other countries as well, and getting first-hand information. That's so very important. Now, we saw the priests chanting the verses in Sanskritam, and you had also said that it's written in the Siddham script, which most people in Japan right now cannot read. But these verses that are being chanted, are only the priests allowed to do so, or can the layman also chant them?
All persons can chant them. And to come back to how they find it possible to chant if they cannot read the Siddham script, you see, they have in front of them a prayer book. And the prayer book has in it the Siddham of the chant, and it has next to it the phonetical chant given in Kana. As I mentioned before, in fact, Kana, the Japanese alphabet, was created for this purpose, so that it is possible, because the sound of the word in Sanskrit is very important, as you are so very well aware. So it was important to not just translate it and have the meaning told verbally, but if possible, also to have the sound in the original Sanskrit. As a matter of fact, the Japanese were very dissatisfied with reading Sanskrit translations coming from Chinese sources in the Chinese alphabet. So that's how Kana got created, and it is this marvelous, absolutely wonderful connection that we have with Japan. And here I'm reminded, since you were showing so many beautiful connections with Tamil Nadu, you would have noticed that Bodhisena of in the film, you would have noticed that Bodhisena of the 8th century was invited by the Emperor of Japan to inaugurate the great Buddha temple at Nara, was most likely from Kanchipuram. In fact, before that, in the 6th century, Bodhidharma, who created in Japan, he was well known for having created in China Dhyana Buddhism, called Chan Buddhism in China and Zen Buddhism in Japan, also most likely has come from Kanchipuram, which was a wonderful center of learning in the Hindu, Buddhist, and Jaina traditions in India. And yes, I would just mention that you were speaking about so many Indian influences across so many countries of Southeast Asia. I had the good fortune of one of the early documentations I did about 30 years ago was of the Champa temples of Vietnam. In fact, when I went there, many of them had been forgotten. Many of them were just in the middle of the forest with no road leading up to it. Sometimes I had to take a risk and go over railway bridges, very afraid that a train may come at that time. But that helped to document the fact of so many Hindu temples of the Champa kingdom in Vietnam. And it also helped a few years later in the World Heritage inscription of the Mission temple in Vietnam. But importantly, Champa needs to be further studied, because the Hindu kingdom of Champa, the seafaring and trading kingdom of Champa, has had a profound influence on the spread of Indian culture across not only Southeast Asia, but even Japan, as was mentioned in the film. And in more recent years, I've had the joy, Sujata and I have had the joy of finding that, in fact, it was not the land route on which Bodhidharma went to China, but as some Southeast Asian traditions have pointed out also, Bodhidharma actually went on the sea route. And it is in Vietnam that we have found that after the Buddha, the next most revered deity is Bodhidharma. There are scores of temples to that great teacher from Kanchipuram, who spread Buddhism and so much knowledge. And dhyana, the concept of dhyana itself. And before he reached China, it was through Vietnam that he went. I'm sorry I spoke at so much length, but thank you.
No, that was extremely interesting. So the route through which Buddhism went to Japan is through these great scholars, as well as perhaps trade contacts.
The two primary routes of the travel of Buddhism and Indian culture to Japan. One is through China. That has been, as you are aware, the well-known one. But what has not been so well known, but is profoundly important, is that from South India and other places, through the Champa kingdom, the seafaring kingdom, these influences traveled to Japan. For instance, even the manuscript of the Ushnish Vijaya, which was used by the Japanese emperor, was most likely from Champa. And the more that you study Champa, it's like a box opening up, out of which flows so much knowledge. Champa has been much more important than is been understood in the past or even currently. And it needs to go much further. And in fact, Bodhidharma's profound importance in Vietnam also, I believe, needs to be studied further. Thank you.
And so would you very soon give us a book on, other than your documentary, a connection between India and Champa and Japan? A book that's much needed, because much of what you said today, we didn't know about earlier.
Well, I already have a book on Hindu deities worshipped in Japan. And that I believe is a very useful work on the subject. And I'm doing another book. You see, just at the point when the pandemic began, India International Center had invited me to hold an exhibition and an international seminar, which I was holding, on the subject of Sanskrit and Hindu deities in Japan. The exhibition was held, but it was inaugurated, at least it was on for some time. And the seminar could not be held at the last moment because the pandemic began. And the Japanese scholars, because there were many Japanese scholars coming and speaking on the occasion. So what has been done now is that I am putting together the papers which the Japanese scholars had prepared at my request. So besides my own book, which is there with many photographs, Hindu deities worshipped in Japan, there will, in a year or so, also be another book in which there is the contribution of the Japanese scholars also speaking about the subject. And here I must mention that the book is co-researched by Sujata Chatterjee, and it also has an essay on the Japanese perspective by Dr. Mihoko Hiraoka. So the one that's already out also has a Japanese perspective presented in it. Champa, yes. Yes, actually, presently I'm working on another edition of my book, which is coming out from Thames and Hudson, London, on the Ajanta caves, which includes my digital restoration of the Ajanta paintings. So after that book is done, I believe all the time that I have and whatever time that I have left, I guess should be used to put down more and more of these things, because there has been so much travel and so much assimilation of knowledge and photographs that there has perhaps been not enough time for dissemination. But I would say that since 2001, Doordarshan have been showing one film of mine every day. And many schools, many art schools, many people from across the country say that they benefit a great deal from it. So besides my books, which are of course my main thing, and as an art historian, it is so important. My books are so important to me. But I would say that the same depth of research, which is because my films have been primary research. And the films also have a way of carrying the knowledge to a very large number of people. Yes. So these have been my attempts. The book on Champa, I agree with you. I should work upon it as soon as I can. Thank you so much.
We look forward to many more books, many more documentaries from you, because these are honestly eye-openers. All this information given by you in a very, very interesting way. Thank you so much. Vijayalakshmi ji, may I conclude now?
Yes, Chitra, you can conclude, and then Varsha will just deliver the vote of thanks.
So thank you once again, Vijayalakshmi ji and Sri Binoy Bell. Honestly, the word that I'm using again and again is enlightening, because this is a knowledge that you have given us, which is not available from very many other sources. India's contacts with Japan, how much Japan has imbibed from ancient and medieval India by way not only of Sanskritam, by way of the Siddham script, by way of the way deities are worshipped, by Havans. So much has gone from here to there, and the fact that it is acknowledged, and the fact that it's being brought back to India by a person who has done first-hand research like you, we can't thank you enough. And thank you, Vijayalakshmi ji, for putting all this together. I know it's not an easy task organizing a webinar. You have to contact so many people and put it all together. Not at all easy. And you do it very well, time after time. I know the effort that goes into it. So thank you. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much, Chitra. Very kind words.
Sure.
Yes, that was wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Chitra, for your kind words. That was an immense amount of information we have been exposed to in the past hour or so. So it's wonderful to see the Indian influence spilt over in Southeast Asia. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Chitra and Binoyji for taking us through this very informative session. I also want to thank Mr. Peter for staying with us throughout and for providing us with the most exquisite paintings. Thank you, Aishwarya, for being with us today and for reciting the Mela Suttam. Lastly, I thank all our wonderful audience for being here with us and for supporting our endeavors constantly. Until our next event, good evening and namaste.